Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. We're pleased to welcome Major Neill Franklin, 34-year veteran of first the Maryland State Police and then the Baltimore Police Department, and the executive director of an organization called LEAP, or Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Neill, welcome to the show.
Well, Bill, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Neill, as a young police officer, you were on the front lines of the 40-year-old war on drugs, working as a narcotics agent, leading hundreds of drug busts. What triggered your road to Damascus conversion into a tireless champion of marijuana legalization?
Well, Bill, for me, it was one particular thing, and that's the violence that we are experiencing, not just in this country, but on a global scale regarding the prohibition of drugs. Prohibition didn't work back in the 1920s with alcohol here in the United States. It made gangs wealthy, Al Capone in Chicago, Bugsy Siegel, and the likes of those guys. We had drive-by shootings and running gun battles back then in the 1920s from alcohol prohibition, and we had the very same thing today in our neighborhoods and communities with the prohibition of drugs. So it was the violence that's generated from this illicit business of selling drugs. Here we are attempting to solve a public health crisis. People abusing drugs. We're trying to solve this public health crisis with criminal justice solutions, and it just doesn't work. We should have learned from the failed policies of alcohol prohibition in the 1920s. So with me, it was one particular incident dealing with violence. It was back in 2000. I had just retired from the Maryland State Police. I had begun working for the Baltimore Police Department as the head of training. And a very good friend of mine, his name is Ed Totley. He was a Maryland State Trooper. He was working undercover in narcotics. He had done that for over a decade. He had worked a number of cases for me when I was commanding drug task forces with the Maryland State Police. And now here he was in October of 2000 working with the FBI in Washington, D.C. He was buying cocaine from a mid-level drug dealer. And during this final buy of cocaine, the deal kind of went a little south. And the dealer did not know that Ed was an undercover police agent. He just thought that he was another street drug dealer. This guy decided he was going to rip Ed Totley off. He was going to keep the drugs. He was going to keep the money, double his profits. And when you do that in this very dangerous business of cat and mouse selling these drugs, you better kill anyone you're going to rip off because of retaliation. And that's what he figured he had to do. So he shot Ed Totley at point blank range that night on October 30th of 2000. And from that point forward, I just started thinking about things differently. I started realizing just how much violence I had seen and that I had known in policing in Baltimore and policing in Maryland, and how it was all, most of it seemed to be tied directly back to the war on drugs and this illicit market. And it took me a year or so or two to, really make this turn to where I felt comfortable in speaking about the problems of prohibition. And it's just been a hell of a journey ever since.
Neill, all of this is supposed to be done for a good cause. How do drugs ruin lives, and how much of that is caused by the use of the drugs themselves compared to the war on drugs?
This is a good question. A lot of people think that drugs ruining lives, drug abuse is the main issue. But drugs aren't the main issue. It's the policies that we have chosen to manage drugs. So here's my point. You can't have a war against an inanimate object. Okay, so I'm using a microphone to talk to you, right? So just say I'm using a microphone when I'm giving one of my presentations. It would be like having a war against that microphone. That microphone is either going to do good things for me or bad things.
Right.
It all depends upon my message. Now, if I spew hate and ugly words through that microphone, then somebody might want to say, hey, let's prohibit that microphone, so he can't do these things. But if I speak words of edification, if I build people up through using that microphone, communicate good information, and that microphone's a very good tool. It's the same thing with drugs. Drugs can do very good things in our society, as we know they do. They help people deal with pain. They cure people of certain illnesses,
Right.
and they, when they're used properly in a proper environment. Unfortunately, the policies that we've chosen, prohibition of drugs, have created this very, very bad and ugly place for using drugs and managing drugs. They've created the violence. They've created mass incarceration. They've led to other problems in society, whether it's police and community relationships, because it's led us to this place of zero tolerance policing, great disparity issues in how we go about policing and responding to these drug laws and where we police in poor Black, brown communities. So the policies have been extremely more problematic in society than drug use, drug abuse ever could be.
From a public safety perspective, which drug causes more behavioral problems, alcohol or marijuana?
Alcohol by far causes more of a problem for us in society. From my place of expertise in policing and dealing with people who are under the influence of these drugs, so 34 years in law enforcement that I've responded to many, many calls for domestic violence. And I'll just use this one particular area of domestic violence. Never, not one time have I ever responded to a call of domestic violence where marijuana was the drug being used and the problem dealing with that person's behavior.
Sure.
It's always alcohol. Always alcohol.
And somehow we managed to keep that legal.
Oh, yes. We've learned our lesson already from alcohol. Okay, we don't want to go back ever to that place of prohibition because we're still going to have the problems of use and abuse. But if we go back to prohibition, then we're going to compound those problems of use and abuse with problems of criminality and incarceration and all the things that we're currently now seeing with the prohibition of drugs.
How has the war on drugs changed the nature of policing?
Well, the war on drugs has changed the nature of policing. I think that this is the war on drugs is the number one factor for changing the nature of policing and destroying that relationship between police and community. Because we're no longer guardians of society. And here's my point. The laws that we should be enforcing as police officers are crimes where people are hurting other people. Let me be specific. Murder, rape, robbery, theft, child abuse, and those things. We should never be enforcing laws of consensual adult behavior. Because when you put those laws in place, you now just make the police become adversaries. When you've got a place like Baltimore City where you've got extreme cases of poverty and you have no jobs available for the people who live in these communities, and even if you did have jobs available, we've criminalized so many people from these drug laws that many employers don't want to hire people that have drug convictions on their records. So we maintain this place of poverty. That means these people have to make money.
How much of the Black Lives Matters movement was triggered by the war on drugs?
Even though we don't hear much about the correlation between the Black Lives Matter movement and the war on drugs, I don't think we've done a good enough job of connecting the dots yet, but we'll continue to do that. But from my perspective, in how we go about policing, case in point, racial profiling in this country sits squarely upon the platform of drug prohibition laws and policies. You see, we're pulling cars over on these highways in our neighborhoods, and we're looking for drugs. We're pulling people out of their cars. We're unloading their luggage from the trunks. We're making them sit on the side of the road and the curb, and we're searching. In our neighborhoods, we're stopping people walking down the sidewalk or congregating on corners and talking to one another on corners, and we're strip searching them in the middle of the street.
Right.
Hey, look, even though if we find a gun, yeah, we're happy. The primary reason we are searching people at the rates that we are in this country today, mainly Black and brown people, we're looking for drugs. And that has greatly damaged the relationship between police and community.
Neill, I worked the public safety tech beat in the late 80s and spent a lot of time with both cops and firemen. The differences in their attitudes about the public were night and day. The firemen were genuine heroes, but when the cops let down their hair and spoke their minds in front of me, they sounded like a bloodied, occupying army. After 40 years of war, how do we unbrutalize our police?
Well, it's not going to be easy. to unbrutalize our police. There's been a lot of damage between police and community, that relationship that needs to be rebuilt.
And psychological damage to the officers. These guys have been in a war.
Absolutely. So we spoke earlier about the violence that's generated from this drug trade and these areas that are very dangerous, where the police have to go into and they're giving orders to police and to solve crimes and continue to work these drug crimes. But here's the thing. Here's my suggestion. One of my suggestions. I have many. It's a very complex issue, but here's an important piece. It is the 9 basic policing principles, referred to as Robert Peel's policing principles. Mm-hmm. Robert Peel was one of our forefathers in policing from the United Kingdom back in the 1800s. His police commissioners came up with these 9 basic policing principles. And they really speak to how police are of the community. We are members of a community that are given the duty to work on crime, dealing with crime 24/7.
The cop that walks the beat is supposed to be your friend.
Absolutely. And these principles speak to things like, not only are you of our community, not an occupier within our community, you are of our community. It is the absence of force that suggests that you're doing a good job. Mm. And the force that you do use among us in our community, we have to approve of. Not only do we have to approve of that force, we approve of your mere existence as a law enforcement entity within our community. It speaks to other things like the absence of crime is evidence of the police and the community doing a good job.
The cop who needs to make the fewest arrests should be the highest rated.
Absolutely, but we have that backwards. We are rewarding police officers for the numbers of arrests that they make within a particular period of time. And it's so much easier to arrest people for the possession of marijuana and the possession of other drugs than it is to arrest someone who's been committing burglaries within a particular community, over the past week or month. Because that takes an investigation. That takes time. Mm. And you know what else it takes, Bill? It takes the cooperation of the community giving you the information that you need to find the person and then to work up a case on that person who's committing these burglaries. Same thing with rapes. Same thing with murders. If we don't have the cooperation and that relationship with the community, we will be extremely ineffective in solving violent crimes or any significant crimes within our community. And we're seeing that in Baltimore, where we are only solving 3 out of 10 murders in Baltimore City when the national average is 6 out of 10. And if you go back to the 1960s, we were solving 9 out of 10 murders in this country on average.
Along with the impact on communities, the war on drugs has done a lot of collateral damage to our constitutional rights. Who put the police above the law when it comes to seizing people's property without even charging them with a crime and then keeping the proceeds for their own benefit?
This is also very fascinating. And one of the biggest problems that we have regarding constitutional rights and the war on drugs and the violation of such is dealing with our Fourth Amendment right, which is our protection to be free from unreasonable search and seizure in this country, the land of the free. Now, the law is clear. The Constitution is clear. The Bill of Rights is clear. The Fourth Amendment is clear, meaning that law enforcement needs probable cause before we can go to a judge and get a search warrant to search you, your home, your property. However, the problem here is case law. It is our judges who have ruled on certain things regarding these cases, which give the police more leeway than what's afforded to them in the actual wording of the Fourth Amendment, for instance. So we really have to be careful. Our judges who are making these decisions, who are evaluating these cases, I think the first thing they need to do is go back and read the actual amendment first before they get into whether or not they're going to allow police to go a step or two further than what that amendment allows.
The Federal Department of Justice recently suspended their asset forfeiture equitable sharing program. Why and how will things change once the profit motive is taken out of policing?
The reason that program has been suspended is because we, the advocates, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, the ACLU, Drug Policy Alliance, and many other organizations that are out here doing this work, we have made a very good case. We have presented the evidence that these policies are being abused by law enforcement. These policies, which came about mainly in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan, were to go after drug kingpins and the wealth that they had accumulated from this illicit trade. Now it's being used on the average citizen who just happens to have a marijuana joint in their pocket.
Or just cash in their suitcase.
Or just cash in their suitcase, absolutely. This is what we refer to as incentivized policing. Because the civil forfeiture program has been abused, and again, society and the courts have allowed the police to literally stop someone. If we find cash on their person within their car, we can take that cash and put the burden upon the citizen to prove that that cash is innocent. So what I mean by that, it is innocent of being involved in any illegal activity or being the proceeds of illegal activity. It should be the burden of the state to prove that it is guilty. But unfortunately, our laws have allowed us to go in this other direction. It's been a great burden to society and those people who have been victimized by the police.
Neill, times are changing. Colorado has now gone a year since legalizing marijuana. What have we learned from their experience?
Well, there's one very important thing that we've learned, and that is that the sky didn't fall. There were many, many people talking about how things are going to get so bad in Colorado that teenage usage rates are going to go up, that we're going to have all of these accidents and dead bodies all over our highways because people are driving stoned. You know, they talked about this huge nightmare that we're going to experience in Colorado. You know what, Bill? It hasn't happened. And you know what? It's not going to happen. At most, all of these factors have remained flat. There has been no recognizable increase or decrease regarding the use of marijuana among our young people. There have been no recognizable, increase or decrease of fatalities upon our highways and so on. But on the other side of the coin, there are a number of great things that have happened for that state of Colorado. Their tax base has gone up, has increased dramatically, so they're able to fund very much needed programs. People are moving to the wonderful state of Colorado. Real estate prices are going up. Jobs are increasing. And that makes things better for everyone in that state, not just the people who are benefiting from the jobs, whose real estate prices happen to go up. It's a wonderful thing for the state. So again, the sky didn't fall.
How have the police in Colorado reacted?
The police are fine. And well, let me put it this way. The police can now, as they are, focus upon those crimes where people are hurting other people. Okay, they're no longer wasting their time and energy and limited resources on arresting people for possession and low-level marijuana crimes. Don't get me wrong, there are some police officers who aren't that happy. You see, because the very distinct odor of marijuana allowed us, the police, to get into your cars, to get into your pockets, to search you, to get into your homes. And from that, we were seizing cash, we were seizing money, we were seizing property.
That game is over.
But they don't have that in Colorado anymore. That game is over, and that's a win for the citizens of Colorado.
Bring us up to date on progress on the state level legalizing marijuana. Which states have done it already, and which are forecast to legalize soon?
So far in the United States, we've had Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, and Alaska to legalize marijuana for retail businesses. Washington, D.C. also legalized cannabis, so you could grow it for yourself. You just can't sell it on a retail market. Other states that we're looking at for the very near future is California. We're looking at a number of states here on the East Coast, up in New England. We're looking at Rhode Island. We're looking at Vermont and New Hampshire. We're also looking at my home state of Maryland. Unfortunately, we're not looking at too many states, if any, in the South, but they'll eventually come online. But currently, it's the western part of the country and up in the New England area.
Neill, tell us more about LEAP and how community organizations can get your members to come and speak at their events.
Well, this wonderful organization that I've happened to be the executive director of now for over 5 years, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Again, for those that don't know, we're an international nonprofit organization of law enforcement professionals. That's police officers, judges, criminal prosecutors, prison wardens, federal agents, and on. And we have branches in 6 other countries. We have this wonderful speakers bureau of these professionals who go out and speak in Congress. They speak at Harvard. They speak at your community colleges. They speak to civic organizations and groups, anyone who invites them in, conferences and so on. And we have grown from the 5 original members in 2002 to tens of thousands around the globe today. And we continue to advocate for a change in these drug policies. And for anyone that wants one of our speakers to come speak, they can make that arrangement right from our website, which is leap.cc, leap.cc. And I invite any and everyone to seek out our speakers and have us come talk. As one of our co-founders, Peter Chris, would say, he says, you may not initially agree with what we're talking about regarding ending the prohibition of drugs, but you can't tell us we don't know what we're talking about because we've been on the front lines of the war on drugs and we know it inside and out, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Neill, thanks so much for coming on the show. Good luck with your quest, and please keep in touch.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
That was Major Neill Franklin from LEAP here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Real Clear Radio Hour is a not-for-profit, donor-supported program. To make sure you don't miss any of our shows or to catch up on our archive of over 200 interviews with leading thinkers and doers from around the world, stop by realclearradio.org and sign up for updates. If you'd like to hear more programs like this, please hit the donate button or contact us to become a corporate supporter. Real Clear Radio Hour is produced in conjunction with Real Clear Politics, America's premier independent political website. That wraps up our show for this week. Please join us next week, same time, same station. See you then.